So, how do we recognize bad care? I have to tell you, my honest answer to this question is that we can't. We cannot do so entirely because, as Margaret Urban Walker argued in her wonderful book, Moral Understandings, morality shifts depending upon what the community believes are moral understandings. Walker didn't earn herself much favor from professional philosophers when she said they don't really have any insight into what morality is. Morality is a result of an ongoing argument and discussion within a particular community about what constitutes good and bad. And it changes over time. For example, homosexuality used to be roundly condemned by everyone, and now most people would say that if to deny people sexual expression is a violation of their human rights. So that's a shift. It's happened in my lifetime, I'm happy to say, and it's an example of the way moral understandings change. So Walker suggests that an approach she calls exercises in transparency, by which we can at least begin to make sure that we're looking at the right points where there's this conflict. She says, different relative moral positions in differentiated social lives create the gates for new knowledge and relations of trust. Here's how she puts it. When we pay attention to these different moral positions, quote, they open gates for the flow of hidden experiences, excluded testimonies, submerged perceptions, and subjugated knowledges. Through these, we learn anew how to live, what may be said for and against it, and what is felt about it. Though this, in turn, relations of trust are buttressed, collapsed, are renegotiated, and are newly reforged. And seeking such transparency from the standpoint of an ethic of care, and this is the hard work I did when Kelly gave me the title Thinking with Care, I thought about, well, what is it that we can do to make sure that we're looking at these different relative moral positions in differentiated social lives thoughtfully? And it occurred to me that there are at least 6 things that we can do, and I'll list them here. First, do the practices of care that we're engaged in mitigate, reduce, and repair harm? It was Dan Engster, my colleague in care studies, who suggested that the avoidance of harm has to be a key element of the ethic of care. And I think he's right. Incidentally, this is what care ethics, I think, shares fundamentally with contemporary abolitionist movements. Second, do the practices of care and care receiving promote the flourishing, especially of those who do the care work and those who receive care? Many writers on disability, for example, note that disability policies are often begrudging rather than commitments to flourishing. Oh, I guess we have to do that for those people now. And that's not good care, it's bad care. Third, do the practices provide time? Do the practices of care and care receiving promote an appropriate use of and appreciation of the ways in which care time differs from clock time? Anybody who's ever engaged in a care process knows this is true. Care doesn't happen according to a time frame. We need to somehow adjust it. Fourth, is care anti-hierarchical? By this I mean, do the practices of care and care receiving allocate responsibility and decision-making to the appropriate and ideally most local level? In general, the more caregivers and care receivers who are close to the needs of care are involved in decision-making, the better that will be. But that's not the only response, right? Because it's also the case that sometimes issues can't be resolved on the local level, and you need some other level of intervention. And so there has to be an appropriate level at which to make decision-making. Fifth, and we'll talk more about this later, vicious or virtuous circles of care. Look, practices of care beget other practices of care, and the question is the circle that they're creating a vicious circle of care or a virtuous circle of care? And finally, democracy. Do the practices of care and care receiving include everyone in the decision-making process who should be involved? Does everyone have a say in making the determinations of what care to give, what care to receive, how to set priorities for care? And if not, how can we amplify the voices of those who are traditionally excluded? Now, I'm sure I could generate an even longer list of questions to begin with. Um, an exercise in transparency, as Walker put it. But individually, more importantly, collectively, we can always ask these kinds of questions of our own practices, and perhaps that will help us to decide whether, in fact, we are engaged in good care, or, as sometimes often happens, in care that's not ideal and is, in fact, sometimes even bad care.